If you are a podcaster, you probably thought about what is the biggest social media strategy question for podcast hosts. And that is, should I have a social media account dedicated for my podcast, or should I integrate it within my own personal brand? And if you're new here, hello, I'm Anna Xavier. I'm an award-winning podcast marketer, and I am the founder of the Podcast Space. In the past 15 years, I have worked with podcasters from all over the world, covering different industries. And this question always comes up when it's time to market the show. Whether you are starting your podcast or whether you've been podcasting for a while, this question is so recurrent that I thought, let's do a podcast episode about this. And so we will break down exactly who is better suited for each option, also the opportunities and drawbacks of each one, what every podcaster gets wrong, and I'll promise you that probably you didn't think about that, and the 5 questions to ask yourself that will answer this major question. Let's dive into this week's episode of the Podcast Space. This question, it is so interesting because I get it not only within my own discovery calls, within the coaching that I do for podcasters, the consulting that I do with small business owners, but also it's something that gets asked in a lot of the sessions that I host. I've worked with brands like Captivate, Osha, and even Riverside. And this question always pops in the chat. So I was like, let me answer this in a very kind of like obvious way in this podcast episode, because I think that as a podcaster, every single option is different and it really depends on many things. So here's a couple of questions, 5 questions specifically, that I want you to think about when it's time to determine, should you have a dedicated social media account for your show, or should you tag along to your personal account? So the first question that I have for you is, what is the main goal of this account? And I think that if you have not answered this question, and the kind of like the blanket answer that I get normally is like, well, am I not supposed to? And in this podcast, I really tell you about taking ownership of your show, right? Because a lot of this, there's no right or wrong answer, but I think that it's important that you figure out the reason behind every single action, because if you don't, it will lead to burnout and loss in joy of the process. So again, ask yourself, what is the main goal of having this account? Number 2, how many different platforms are you going to be creating this account for, if you are creating? So whether you are expanding your personal account and tacking on more, or if it is just kind of creating some from scratch, are we looking at just creating one that is kind of mirroring what you already are using? Or is it really making sure that you are taking kind of like the spot and securing that account on, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, X? And I'm hesitating to continue because, let's be honest, there's so much, many, many, many more. Blue Sky, there you go. I was like, I know I'm missing one. So, that's very important, but that cannot be answered without asking yourself this, which I would say is potentially one of the most important questions, which is, do you have time, budget, or capacity to develop a social media strategy for this account? Because it's not about just creating the account first thing. Is like, what is going to go there, right? That is tied in with another big question. And again, this is the episode that you probably want to listen to it a few times and kind of like pause it and go back to it again. But number 4 is, do you have the capacity to go beyond the bare minimum? Which is, for me, a personal pet peeve. People go, well, I'm everywhere, and all I'm doing is putting the clips of the show and the account is not growing. And if you stick until the end, you will understand why just kind of like trying to be everywhere is not, it sounds like a great idea until, you get to a very specific part of your strategy. And number 5, how else can listeners publicly share your show or talk about your show and tag you? And and it's in the sense of like, how else can your show be socially trackable, right? So whether it goes beyond an email, how can you see in the public eye, let's say like that people are talking about your show? Because as podcasters, we work so hard to create and build a podcast that we want to make sure that we're able to see the impact of our work. We are able to kind of exchange feedback with our listeners. And so if you're listening to this on Spotify, for instance, or on YouTube, you will be able to leave me a comment down below. But if your podcast is not necessarily listened to that much on Spotify, mainly, for instance, on Apple Podcasts, you may not be able to access publicly and answer some of those listener questions, which I think is really important. Not so much from the standpoint of like growth for business or whatever, or downloads, but truly more about that personal relationship that we have with our show to be able to see the impact of our work, which is really important. All right, so let's move into the next section. If you answer these questions, if you paused it, I want to move into specifically what are kind of like the best suited contenders, should we say, for each option. So let's start with, if you choose to share podcast content on your personal account, you are going to be looking to, for instance, number one, grow your personal brand. Having a podcast add on to your personal social media is great, because if you're someone, for instance, many of my clients, they are business owners and they are trying to show up more online and kind of like go away from the hidden, let's say, forest that they've been in a while, and they want to start making waves in the online space. It can feel like it makes the most sense, right? You're not doubling the work. You're creating content that people want to give you a follow for. So that is in those two elements, whether you're trying to build your authority, right? You're trying to grow your personal brand through the expertise you have, or you're trying to network with decision makers or be associated with a high worth network of people, right? So whether you are looking to grow into the next phase of your business, whether you're trying to network with people maybe for like a change in your career, this makes a lot of sense. It makes also sense if you don't have already going on a lot of content pillars. And I do have an episode on content pillars that you definitely need to listen to. I'll make sure that I leave that in the show notes. I think that was already like season 1 of the podcast. So it's still very, very good, still gets plays every single week. And it kind of goes beyond not only like the podcast, but it really helps you think about the intersection of like the podcast and social media. So highly recommend. It also makes sense if you have a logical connection between your personal brand and your podcast's content, right? If people publicly know you for being an expert in whatever you talk about the show. Also, if you don't like toggling between accounts, I have worked with so many hosts that basically through me asking a series of questions, we got to to some of these questions, for instance, we got to that point that yes, it would be great to have a side account, but they did not. I was like, literally, one of my questions tends to be, do you see yourself logging into the secondary account to go and post, or to go and engage, or to go and share? And they were like, absolutely not. And then I'm like, there you have it, your answer. It's not a lot of times through, doing extensive market research. It's like, truly, what is the most sustainable thing that you can do in your current situation? And so for a lot of people, it's just like starting another account, right? As in the nice to have, but like it's not something that they can do right now. So they are not doing it. And last but not least, this is the best option if you don't have the capacity to manage more than one account, right? So if you are prone to missing notifications, missing comments, and this is something that I did mention. I do have actually a social media podcast episode that I highly recommend that you listen to, like the mistakes that podcasters make. And one of the things that will happen is that when you create a secondary account and you don't necessarily log in, or you don't have the mental capacity to go, or the systems, what will happen is that basically you're missing out on comments and likes and messages. And you completely miss those. And then you're telling me in the same breath, like, nobody is commenting. And the amount of times I'm doing consultations with clients and we go onto their social media and I'm like, there's one comment, there's one comment, there's one comment. There's not many, but if people comment and you never reply to their comment, that is almost like a Pavlovian experiment in its own right, because people start realizing that you never reply. So if you never reply, what's the point of commenting anyway, right? So I hope that that was good for identifying if you fall into that profile. It makes sense to integrate the podcast within your show. And now here's what's the perfect case for someone who is wanting to create its own dedicated account for the podcast. Do you want separation between brands? I have a few clients, and for instance, even for me, I never wanted, first off, of course, the company is called The Podcast Space. But even though I am online and I create a lot of content and show up on camera on my phone a lot of times, I like the separation of being able to talk about the things that I want. On a personal level, for instance, I do love interior design. I love architecture. I love human rights. And not that they do not intersect with podcasting, the last one, but you probably would not give two odds if I posted content about interior design, maybe if you don't care about it, right? You're there looking for specifically for the podcast advice, right? And also, I don't want to bombard friends and family who follow me because remember, I am an immigrant in the United States. I've been abroad since 2011. And so for me, my Instagram is a way to communicate with my friends and family and stay connected to friends and family that, moved or I moved multiple times. And so I want that to be the place where they know they can come and know what I'm up to, right? And so I always wanted to have that separation in place. So again, it doesn't mean that it's like, for instance, I am a public, air quotes, oh my God, I'm rolling my eyes at myself right now, but I am a podcasting public figure and I don't want, like, for instance, anyone to know where I live or exactly like what my family looks like. If you're my friend and we work together in the podcast industry, great, but I like to keep that separation. And I think for me is very important. Also because I worked with a cybersecurity expert. And so I kind of like in the past have heard about things that I'm like, yeah, keeping things separate is really nice, but also safe. So if you want separation in between brands, it makes tons of sense. Now, for instance, podcasting, if you don't want it to be connected to your personal life, like I just mentioned, I don't want my family to have to sift through all of the tips for podcasts, for podcasters and my two cents and things. I'm going to keep it separate, right? Also, if there's already too much going on with your brand, if you are someone who, for instance, has a lot of endeavors, has multiple businesses, it may not make sense to tag the podcast into that account. So have its own separate thing is a better choice. And also then if you have the capacity or budget or, time to allocate time to create a separate account, absolutely do it. In the beginning, I knew, and again, for instance, like I don't post as much on my personal as I post on my social media account for the podcast space. And even I want to make a reference to this because LinkedIn didn't necessarily help me grow the podcast space's company account on LinkedIn. And I realized that I would always have a ton more traction on LinkedIn. And so basically people follow me there. I know that they follow the podcast space, but honestly, I kind of stopped working on that account because nobody was seeing that content and it just didn't make sense anymore for me to continue duplicating stuff. And so what I just chose was when you are on LinkedIn, you will follow me, the authority, right? So actually, this is a perfect example. I didn't even think about this. The perfect example of how I can have like a split reality within it. If you want to follow the podcast space on Instagram, you know that I share a lot of in-depth content about the industry and about the show and about how you can work with me as a podcaster. But on LinkedIn is a very different option because it's already a professional setup, right? So keep that in mind. Specifically, another element is if you want to play around and experiment with the format, and if you know that the podcast is not maybe going to be like a big project that you're tackling in your future, or if, for instance, you're on TikTok and you want to experiment a little bit with video and you don't want your friends and family to see. So sometimes for creative freedom, it is actually better to have that separation because you're not thinking too much about your friends and family finding or watching it. And let's be honest, I think that there are a lot of podcasters out there that they are not truly pursuing their biggest dreams or the kind of like pursuing the craft, should I say, to the full extent of it, because they are worried about what their friends and family may say. It also means that sometimes, because they are doing both in sharing their podcast on their personal page, what ends up happening is that sometimes I'm having consultations and people will tell me, I get great feedback from this side of the podcast. And as a strategist, I can listen to the first, I would say probably like 1 to first 5 minutes of a podcast and know. And so the strategy that they're sharing on social media and the fact that they are only sharing it on their personal side means that all their friends and family love seeing them, right? And so they're like, oh my gosh, the show is great. I love it. It's amazing. And then in terms of reaching their actual goals, there's a misalignment, because they're trying to listen to the people who are actually not their ideal customer, which are the friends and family most times. You're just too worried about what they may say or think. So another reason for it to not be in the same place. And then if you are actually willing to build connection with your followers beyond the podcast, having that separation to go beyond the promos and make that personal connection, it may be better suited to actually do it on the side. So as a podcast exclusive social media account. And I tell you all the time, pick up your phone, talk to your audience, create content that goes beyond just like the promos, because it's the easiest way in between episodes to create connection, to create anticipation, and to really show that connection that you're looking forward to with your listeners. Now, let's talk about specifically pros and cons, because I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So when we're looking at integrating your podcast kind of like account into your personal, what we're looking is, as a pro, is really easy to bridge that podcast persona to the real persona if there's like minimal deviation from what the content is and what your real persona is like, right? If that's the case, that makes a lot of sense. Now, the con is within the same. If you're not intentional with that bridging, it can feel like a mess, right? Like one day I'm seeing your dogs, one day I'm seeing Aunt Julie, the other day I'm seeing you thrifting, the other day I'm seeing you going on the, carpool and having, just like off the cuff thoughts. So, because again, you're not thinking about your ideal listener, right? You're talking to your friends and family, you're talking to anyone who is following you. So it may feel like very disjointed. And again, on the other side, if you're choosing to create a dedicated social media account for your podcast, the pros is, of course, easier, more focused way to create a marketing plan around the show, and a clearer, more obvious reason why I should be there, right? Like it's so clean. Within a few seconds, I should be able to see right away what your account is about and why I should follow it. Do I want to follow it or not? Now, the con, if it is for a business, you do need to incorporate that logical ways, right, to bridge the gap between viewer to a buyer. Normally, and if you have your personal account or your business account, your podcast account, and your personal account, a lot of people really struggle to make that connection between the, hey, I am a listener of the show, how can I work with you? Because it feels like a repetition. And so sometimes people just do not do that connection at all. And so it becomes like one of those missed opportunities to turn viewers into buyers. And so I want you to keep in mind that. Now, here are the things that most podcasters get wrong when it's time to create a social media account for your podcast, whether that is an independent account for the show itself or for their personal account and integrate the content within that personal account or professional account if you have a professional account already. People treat those accounts kind of like a depository of clips. They're just like, oh, I have a clip. Here's the clip. And there's no thought into the experience, the viewer experience. And so I want you to start thinking about the motivation of the follow, right? Like, why should anyone, this is the thing that no one thinks about, take yourself out of the equation and think, why should they follow me? Is it very obvious what I am offering here, right? the experience of the follow. If I follow, what do I get? And maybe it may be helpful to schedule content and then go through your personal account and watch what has happened throughout that week, right? Every day you're logging in and seeing what was shared. And does it make sense? Right? Because I find that a lot of podcast hosts that I work with, there's no strategy. They're emitting it right away, that they're just putting it out there. They're not thinking through anything. There's no intention about like the captions. There's no keywords. It's just like, I was told to put podcast content on my account. Here it is, right? So always try to think about from the listener perspective. If they listen to a podcast and they want to go follow you, what are they getting? Right? Like, I think that that is very, very important that we take ourselves out of the equation and see it as a stranger. And I've seen a shift in social media as in how the algorithms are working. So for instance, TikTok continues to be volume, right? Like throw all of these clips, something must work. And then Instagram, they will, as of right now, November 2025, they will reward accounts that post at least 3 times. So if you're posting 1 time, they will really hinder. And many social media accounts that like just basically companies that help you just grow your social media account have shared this. There's a huge difference between posting 1 time to posting 3 times. And so what does like a manageable, sustainable strategy look like in that sense for you, right? If you're just posting 1 time, how can we progressively move you to have 3 in a way that feels exciting, that is following some templates so you don't burn out? And that there creates some consistency and expectations from the viewer standpoint. So those are some really manageable situations. I'm going to give you as well some examples that you can follow. But I think it's really important that you really understand that just because you're not there yet, it doesn't mean that you can't get that done. Because, for instance, LinkedIn is focusing specifically on the quality of that content. And so the relevancy. And I have multiple posts that I've shared that have been shared maybe like 2 weeks ago, and they're still getting traction. So LinkedIn is still continuing to show content. So for instance, for a LinkedIn strategy, you would want to make sure that every piece of content is relevant to your industry, that you're following best practices so that the algorithm itself can kind of benefit you and continue pushing. Now, I don't want you to think that the only way to grow is following just the clips, right? We need to, again, give people a reason to give us a follow. And so I want you to think about, what does good quality look like for you? Is it a really good photo? Try that. Or one very good clip for the podcast. And I use Riverside, for instance, and Riverside now has a lot of really great features. So they have not only clips, the magic clips that automatically are created, but they have what's called hooks. So the hook for the beginning of the episode or to promote the podcast. And so if you are using a tool like Riverside, again, I am an affiliate, I have to disclaim that, but I truly believe that they're really creating a lot of really awesome tools that help you create better content to attract new listeners from the discoverability standpoint of the power of social media and, for instance, like YouTube, right? So really know that there are tools out there that can help you get a little bit closer to that goal of growing your influence online on social media. And so I want you to think about like, what would that incremental quality mean? How can you do this in a way that is honoring where you are right now? It doesn't burn you out. I mentioned a lot of different things in this podcast episode, but it is important that you really make strategic decisions, because the data keeps telling us that a lot of people are starting podcasts. Not a lot of people continue podcasts. Only 5% of people who started a podcast made it to episode 100. And so every single time you're producing one episode and that you're choosing to intentionally promote that episode, it will help you continue stay in that sustainable path so that you continue to leverage your influence through the podcast. So if you're listening to all of this and you're like, Anna, I think I need help, you can always book a discovery call with me. I am taking new clients before the end of the year, and I would love to help you figure out exactly where are you feeling stuck? What is the most sustainable way to go forward? Is it by experimenting with carousels? Is it by trying clips? Is it by direct-to-camera videos? Like, what is it that makes sense for your current situation? I would love to work with you. You can always find the resources of everything that I mentioned in these podcast episode in the show notes, which obviously includes a link to work with me. So I hope that you look into them, because I dedicate so much time and effort into every single episode to help you on your journey. And of course, if you want to see any examples of things that I mentioned in this podcast episode, give me a follow. I'm at The Podcast Space on Instagram. And of course, on my personal profile on LinkedIn, I'm Anna Xavier. So look at those, look at what I'm doing, take inspiration. Message me if you liked some specific post, and if you're going to be replicating it, I would love to hear it from you. And of course, as always, in between these podcast episodes, I invite you to keep creating imperfect content that moves you forward. I'll see you in the next episode.